extremely exciting data news for Magic the Gathering players. MTGO leagues are now publicly accessible by the Daybreak API. That means almost 600,000 more matches of vintage data. Welcome back, vintage gamers, for some exciting data talk. It is being cleared by the Daybreak team. MTGO is okay with us showing you the full MTGO League data. Now, this is going to be predominantly about vintage, but it applies to every format, and I expect lots of data sites might start pulling this information and putting it into different web pages and such in the short term here. What changed? What's going on? Basically, when MTGO was underneath Wizards, this kind of league data was always very shrouded. You didn't really get to access it, but it was frequently quoted in ban and restriction announcements. Now, under Daybreak Games, we have this Census Daybreak API. Let's just read a little bit here. We encourage players to use the Daybreak Games Data Services API to increase their engagement with Daybreak Games and their Daybreak gaming company and their games to create websites and mobile apps for other players to use and enjoy. This is a very industry standard style thing and applies to multiple different Daybreak games, EverQuest, PlanetSide, DC Universe, and of course Magic the Gathering Online. This is public. Anyone can use it. Yes, you do need to have somewhat of a programming background to understand how to utilize it. But I'll just show you really quickly what this is it's a REST call setup. So you are going to send their database a REST call, and the database will respond back with a big piece of JSON or XML. So there's a bunch of different legal calls here, looking at things like active data, active card sets, league deck lists, league match wins, tournament deck lists, tournament win-loss. These kind of things are basically you ask the database a question and the database responds in a big packet of information. Shout out to QE, who's one of our data members here, who does tons of work behind the scenes to help us get data for challenges and leagues. QE put together a bunch of Python scripts to make this data collection possible and then put it into our existing spreadsheets. And so that is what you are seeing here. You are seeing a new metagame dashboard. This one's going to be called Vintage MTGO League Metagame Dashboard, and it's only going to contain data from vintage leagues on MTGO. And you can see right here, I'm currently looking at 6/1/21 to now, almost 600,000 matches of vintage. Just a crazy number, a crazy number, and huge insight into what's going on in the format. Yeah, I want to shout out QQE, and I also want to shout out Badro. Badro makes the tool set that people use to scrape MTGO. Between those two users, we've progressed quite a lot in data collection for vintage in the past few years. What do we want to talk about first? Because there's so many things. Okay, maybe number one question, Justin, why is this data not going to be put inside of the other spreadsheet, the Vayne vintage spreadsheet? And that's because this data is not as clean. My vintage challenge data, the way it works is I use the Badro tool scripts to pull the information off the MTGO website, and then I run it through a parsing algorithm that I put together that classifies each and every deck and then puts it into our spreadsheet format. That algorithm works pretty well, especially for challenge decks. Very few times do I have to fix any data. The one thing that doesn't work super well is when a deck falls outside of the normal classifications and falls into a bucket, which are usually called other shops, other blue control, other combo, other death right, other aggro. Those decks are usually harder to classify. They're missing key cards. They're different kind of brews, and they don't always even fall into the right bucket. Typically, challenge decks are really well suited, and the algorithm hits those really well. However, all of the decks in the league dumps are put through the parser algorithm and classified, and they are not double checked by a human. And league decks tend to be more experimental. They'll have more different cards. They won't follow all the same rules. It's a very, precise challenge deck. And the end all be all here is what I want to tell you is you should treat this data in the league data and the classifications that are put in the league data as approximations. You should not treat this as hard and fast. This is 100% truth. This is approximately the best we can do right now, and maybe we'll do better later as we define and filter the parser algorithm to be better suited at classifying decks. But for now, you just need to understand that sometimes the deck is going to be put under the wrong name, whereas in a challenge data, I'm personally looking through all the lists and making sure that the algorithm is doing what it's supposed to be doing. So that's the number one reason that you need to take this as approximation. There's a second reason you need to take this as approximation, and that is due to API constraints. While we can ask the API a question, we can grab from it the leagues and the deck list from the league, and we can ask it win-loss. But the win-loss only returns correctly when there are 5 matches played. So whenever there is a full league played, a 5 league played, you are getting 100% correct win-loss matchup data. We can know when a person plays a league that is less than 5 matches, but it is hard. We cannot determine the exact win-loss of a player who plays a league that is less than 5 matches currently using the API. That means that we are currently approximating win-loss for players who play less than 5 matches. So if you play 4 matches, we're approximating your win-loss at 1 and 3, I believe. And if you are playing 3 matches, we're approximating you at 0 and 3, 2 matches 0 and 2, and 1 match 0 and 1. That is not always going to be the case. In fact, it probably skews slightly lower than it's supposed to be. So all the win rate data should probably be slightly lower than it's actually supposed to be because we don't have the ability to see leagues that are less than 5 matches perfectly. That's another reason. So between deck classification being less certain and actual data being slightly incorrect because of approximations on leagues that are less than 5 matches, I just want to double reiterate that this should not be taken as the gospel or anything here. This should just give you ideas on what decks are looking like in leagues. So I think the very first thing to look at is let's look at the data set that I was most interested in, and that's post Lord of the Rings up until now. I actually want to do post Lord of the Rings up until now. And one thing people were always asking is, was Lurrus Saga too good? Right now, Lurrus Saga actually not doing super well in the Modern Horizons 3 metagame. It's okay, of course, it's still a very strong deck. But for a while, Lurrus Saga was putting up good challenge win rates, and people were asking the question, is this deck too strong? And so I always pose the question back to people, what do you expect the Lurrus Saga league win rate to be? Do you think it will be too high? One of the things that people always quote or not people always quote, but people like to quote the numbers that WotC cites in ban restricted announcements. And a lot of previous ban restricted announcements, WotC said, this deck has an over 55% win rate against the field. And that is one of the reasons we're going to, restrict this card or ban this deck in Legacy or those kind of things. And it turns out that Lurrus Saga, over the course of a year, let's say, since Lord of the Rings, has a 55-ish, almost 55% win rate, and a little bit over, when you do without mirrors, 55% win rate against the field. Now, that's not an extremely high over. It's not like a 60, and that's not something like that. But it is a strong league win rate, but actually a league win rate that I expected it to be higher. 55% win rate is just the right, like I said previously, the borderline of acceptable. 10% meta share in leagues for Lurrus Saga, and 55% win rate over the course. And now this is 200,000 matches. If we were to look at our challenge matches over that same time frame, we only have 44,000 matches. So leagues are going to be worth, we're going to get almost 5 times as much data from leagues as we do from challenges. And you can see here in challenges over the same time frame, Luris non-mirror win rate 54.7, 55.3. Very, very similar win rates, actually. And that was something we were definitely wanted to see. People always ask the question, well, how competitive are leagues? Are leagues super different from challenges? And we can do that now. We can check the metagame now. We can see the differences. And so this is just a static comparison page I made out of curiosity. And so what we have, let's look at the middle column here, which is the same date range we were just looking at. This is from Lord of the Rings up until 4/15/24, which is when I pulled this data 2 months ago. And you're looking at the difference between leagues and challenges in terms of play rate. You can see that you end up with slightly more shops. You can end up with pretty similar amounts of Bazaar, which I think is very interesting. Actually, I guess if I'm going to say this is about the same then, within 2% or so. People always say that there are more Bazaar decks in leagues. Leagues, you're going to face Bazaar decks more often, and that actually doesn't seem to be true. It is true. It's not. Sorry, it's not actually true. There are more Bazaar decks in challenges than there are in leagues. And one of the reasons why is because you're gonna see later on here that there are a few decks that are very much more represented in leagues than challenges. So you're seeing 2% more Bazaar in challenges than leagues. You're seeing, what's this? Almost 2% more shops in challenges than leagues. You're seeing more Luris Saga in challenges than leagues. What else? More Doomsday in challenges than leagues. This is all pretty similar. And then you're seeing, 5% more experimental blue decks that don't fit directly into an archetype. You're seeing 2% more Oath, 2% more PO, and a big number here is 2.6% more other aggro. As for win rates, I think it's mostly the same, but you have to be careful here because some of the high numbers are going to be decks that aren't played very much. So you need to make sure you're looking at decks that aren't played much. But it's kind of funny because while Sphere, Shops and Dredge are played more in challenges, they actually win more in leagues. Anything else? Doomsday loses a lot more in leagues than it does in challenges. What other ones? Let's see. Luris Saga, slightly better win rate in leagues over challenges. Anything else interesting? PO wins more in leagues than challenges. Oath wins more in leagues than challenges, where PO loses more in leagues than in challenges. And so you have a lot of cool things you can reference here. Overall, I was actually my overall evaluation is that it's actually pretty close. Nothing here is super crazy. The things that you think are going to happen in leagues do tend to happen. Like there are more experimental decks in leagues than in challenges. But overall, the normalization of what gets played in challenges versus leagues is actually pretty close. And so you can see here, while Sphere Shops is not doing well in the challenges in this period, Sphere Shops is actually doing very well inside of the leagues in this period. Jewel Shops slightly better in leagues and in challenges. Luris Saga around the same. Turbo Volkey is not close to the challenge prowess that it has here, and so on and so forth. So actually just really cool information, really interesting things happening. Look at this. Tinker actually has a great time in leagues from Lord of the Rings till now, whereas in challenges, Tinker has not really put up those kind of numbers. It doesn't put up those kind of play numbers either. Actually, only slightly more play numbers in leagues. It's kind of hard for me to actually look and parse this immediately. But things to note, Luris Saga, Jewel, Oath, and Initiative as your top 3 decks being played. This one in challenges, Luris Saga, Initiative, Jewel, Dredge, Oath. So pretty similar top decks. The biggest thing to note is Other Aggro here. Other Aggro is your 5th most played deck in leagues, whereas Other Aggro is not remotely played in challenges. So things to think about, things to explore. This link will go all the same places where my other link is. I'm going to put it up in the Discord. I'm going to put it up in the link tree. I'm going to tweet about it. It is going to be available to everyone. And that's how I foresee league data going forward in the future. I can only assume that other data sites are going to start picking up the major formats and start putting together visual displays of how other formats league matches are going. So I think there's one other thing I'd like to talk about. Let's talk about Modern Horizons 3 data. Now, this data is going to be very small because it is only going to be a week or so of data. But let's just peek in and see what's happening, because I've seen it and I know it's interesting. Right now, we only have almost 4,000 matches of leagues in Modern Horizons 3 Vintage, and oh boy, do we have an outlier. Jewel Shops, 12% of the metagame with a 64% win rate. Now, it should be noted that the third most played deck right now is Other Aggro. So other aggro decks are consisting of 12% of the metagame as well, and those decks are faring extremely poorly. So you might be able to draw the conclusion that Jewel Shops are feeding on other aggro, but maybe you could say the same for every other deck in the format is feeding on this large swath of other aggro decks. But this is a really high number right off the bat. Obviously, the confidence interval for this is extremely high, and you can't really say anything with this amount of data so far. But what it should be said is you should be able to identify that Jewel Shops is your front runner for leading the way post Modern Horizons 3, with other things actually following. Sphere Shops with Null Rod's not too far behind. You've got Doomsday and Lurrus Saga as your best looking high played league decks. So things to think about as we move closer to NYSC this weekend, as well as a new set of vintage challenges. I doubt that Jewel Shops will stay like this forever. If you're looking at simply the data for challenges, you'll see 55% win rate, a much more reasonable win rate over the last few challenges. However, you know, some pretty, you can see here, Doomsday has that 65% outlier. So we're going to keep waiting, you know, for more data to come in before going too crazy. But this can give you a nice little direction on what you might want to try out in Modern Horizons 3 Vintage. That's going to be all from me. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure you check out this data links. And definitely, if you ever see QQE on Magic Online or you see Badro on Twitter, make sure that you thank them for their hard work in making all of this possible. Also, thank you to Daybreak for being cool with letting this information go public. Magic the Gathering Online league data has not been, as far as I know, ever a public thing that anyone could access. And now it is. So good luck in your data searching quests. More vintage videos on this YouTube channel. Gameplay every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I will see you then.